I have seen trailers for Ready Player One. It's practically unavoidable the moment you want to watch movies this month. I don't know about you, but my expectations on this film is staggeringly low. Oh sure, it has tons and tons of video game characters and references in there to the point where the entire world is a video game. Sure, it has some really cool visuals and some nice audio direction. Sure, it's directed by Steven Spielberg, who directed a lot of great films in the past. But then again, he also directed Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So I don't have too much hope for this film at all. The film sells way too much nostalgia or trying so hard to cater to me. I hate it when fiction tries to make the protagonists nerds. I am a nerd and I want more protagonists like Guts. I hate being put off in the same level as, say, Shinji Ikari. I want my protagonist to be confident, a guy that is really cool, a guy who can do stuff. If I have to be a nerd, make him like Shinichi from Parasite or Rock from Black Lagoon. At least they're competent at doing their jobs. I am still not sure about the nostalgia direction for this film. It's quite confusing and misguided. It's different to say Wreck-It Ralph. Wreck-It Ralph didn't bank on nostalgia. It had some video game characters, sure, but it also has a fun and enjoyable standalone story. The video game characters are just there to enhance the world's authenticity, rather than the movie relying on them to make it cool. Remove the video game references in Wreck-It Ralph and you have a pretty solid film. Remove the references in Ready Player One and you'll probably have a pretty mediocre film. So I finally saw the film and I was absolutely right. It's not the worst movie by any means, but it is painfully mediocre. It has great visuals, but the story was generic. It follows a very simple and basic premise that you can pretty much guess just by watching the trailer. In fact, you can even know where the movie is going just by watching the trailer. You can guess the main character, the love interest, the bad guy, what's gonna happen in the next 30 minutes. If you can predict what the plot is going to happen next, then you're pretty much gonna sit on that theater feeling bored and wanting the movie to just end, which is gonna take a while because the movie is 2 hours and 20 minutes long for some reason. This movie doesn't remind me of Wreck-It Ralph. This movie reminds me of James Cameron's Avatar, a movie with great visuals but has a generic and predictable story. The underlying foundation of this film is unfortunately lacking. It is so painfully mediocre, predictable, and downright formulaic. The movie brings nothing new to the table. But you know what? Maybe movies can at least sell us with the memorable characters. Wreck-It Ralph has memorable characters. This movie, all the characters are forgettable. Just minutes ago, I talked about how I hate movies with nerd protagonists. Wade Watts, I almost typed him as Wade Wilson in my script, is the personification of everything that I hate from a nerd main character trope. The biggest one being, he's a massive freaking idiot. For a person who is stuck in virtual reality for a long time and explicitly explains to the audiences in the intro that you can be anything in the Oasis, for a character who accuses one person to be a freaking noob, he has to be explained the concept of a girl. That's right, the main character refuses to ignore the fact that a person's avatar in the Oasis has the potential to not reflect who they really are in the real world because the character looks smoking hot. I heard horror stories about his depiction on the book, which is apparently 10 times more miserable, but if this is just the surface of the utter stupidity of this character, I can't take it anymore. The movie is dumb. The main character is an unrelatable idiot who contradicts himself and is an utter moron in the world of anonymity. As for positives, well, the visuals are pretty, but pretty visuals cannot save a mediocre film, and Ready Player One certainly is. Anyway, the reason why I'm talking about Ready Player One is that there seems to be quite a lot of articles talking about connecting Ready Player One to the toxic fan bases that the film attempts to attract, as in, you know, gamers. These journalists went on from the sky high, making the assumption that you are gullible enough to watch a film because, OMG, Tracer, Chun-Li, Iron Giant, the Battletoads, and Master Chief in one film? Sign me up, please! And anyone who actually does think that, unironically, should be decommissioned into being actors in the nearest 90s infomercial. But why did I watch this film then? Because I want to give it a fair chance. The trailers and the promotion might look bad, but at least the film could be enjoyable or surprise me in some ways. Most of the people I talk with consider this film to be pandering to the lowest common denominator possible, banking on nostalgia and uses current year video games to bait you into thinking that this would be an interesting film. The last time it happened, it was called The Wizard. So is Ready Player One the Wizard of this generation with cooler visuals and sleeker directing? In some ways, yeah, but that's not why we are here. We are here to see a bunch of journalists condescendingly talk down to their audiences and insult them for an entire article.
Why the internet is so ready to hate Ready Player One.
I don't know, probably because the movie banks so much on nostalgia.
It combines toxic fanboy culture with a tiresome desire to repeat the past.
Toxic fanboy culture. Writer, you should define what toxic means, what a fanboy is, and what kind of culture they create on this dark dystopian post-apocalyptic world that is the internet.
Ready Player 1 has come to represent a certain kind of toxic fanboy mentality, and no amount of positive reviews can change that now.
Toxic fanboy mentality. Criticizing the awful posters, the writing on the book, and the over-reliance on nostalgia are the signs of toxic fanboy mentality.
I think she's right. You are retarded.
The criticisms focus on two issues: its celebration of geek nostalgia over substance, and its persistent sexism. In the vein of so many adventure stories about dweeby young men, the female lead is a prize to be won. It didn't help that Klein seemed to personify his own work, driving a replica DeLorean and posting creepy nice guy screeds on his blogs.
I agree with the over-reliance on geek nostalgia. Glad that at least you understand that. Apparently the character Artemis is a prize to be won in the book, which thankfully isn't a plot point to the film at all. But how the writer of the book acts is absolutely irrelevant. Carry on.
Ready Player One is a 2-hour PowerPoint presentation about some guy's Funko Pop collection.
Wow, what do you say after that one? Brutal, savage, wrecked, absolutely taken down.
10 years ago, Ready Player One might not have earned such ire. That was before we'd suffered through a glut of referential pop culture, best exemplified by Big Bang Theory. For 11 reasons, Big Bang Theory championed the idea that geeky references can replace actual humor and personality. It celebrates a brand of fandom where men deride women as fake geek girls, making themselves the gatekeepers of some artificial nerd hierarchy.
I haven't seen Big Bang Theory myself, but I have seen the pilot and I didn't laugh a bit. I heard that the show consists of nothing but pop culture references, which is why I just avoid it like the plague and leave it to the lowest common denominator. But to say that Ready Player One wouldn't get that ire 10 years ago is also not true, because 10 years ago was in 2008. The Wizard was released in 1989. The film relied so much on pop culture references at the time, and not a lot of people liked it, at least unironically or without nostalgia lenses.
The novel was published in 2011, just on the cusp of the reboot revolution. J.J. Abrams' Star Trek has already come out, with The Force Awakens, Jurassic World, Man of Steel, and numerous others on the way. They fed into the culture wars brewing online, where certain primarily white and male fans would erupt in fury when any reboot dared to stray from the source material. The ones that inspired the greatest anger were those that welcome a more diverse audiences, Ghostbusters and The Last Jedi.
Did you just assume my race, writer? Are you attributing people's critique of The Last Jedi into how diverse the film was, rather than how much of a boring, tiresome, incomprehensible, absolute mess of a film that was? The criticisms towards The Last Jedi has nothing to do with the cast. It just so happened to be a film that is pretty diverse. It's that the characters are terribly written, the story is messy, etc, etc. I don't have to explain it in detail because I did it months ago in a separate video, and lots of people already have. It's almost like the writer completely ignores the film's merit in favor of diversity. There are some journalists who said that A Wrinkle in Time is admittedly pretty bad, but it's an important film because the main protagonist is a non-white girl, and we need more of them in the film industry, even if the film is garbage. Disney, you already have Moana and Coco. Hell, you had Lilo, Mulan, and Pocahontas back then as well. You are pretty diverse as far as I'm concerned. These offended journalists are just doing their best job at being offended.
Tellingly, two movies this audience celebrated for their originality were Deadpool and Guardians of the Galaxy. Both felt fresh compared to, say, Ant-Man, but they also relied heavily on pop culture references. Both starred 30-something white guys with a middle school sense of humor, and Guardians of the Galaxy wouldn't stay upright without its soundtrack of 1980s pop. They pressed the same button to give us the dopamine kick of comfortable familiarity.
Those are terrible comparisons. Deadpool doesn't have to rely on the X-Men references or any other references to be funny. It has tons of funny moments on its own merits. Same thing goes with Guardians and Ant-Man as well. The 80s pop were there to enhance the film, rather than the film relying on them to serve as a crutch for the story. Ant-Man doesn't have 80s pop and it's still a funny and entertaining film. The difference between Guardians and Ready Player One is that I don't even have to be familiar with the 80s pop song to have an entertaining film. In fact, I don't recognize a lot of the songs in the film. I was born in the late 90s and grew up in the 2000s, don't blame me. Ready Player One is a mediocre film, being sprinkled with games and movie references to hide its painfully mediocre quality. That's what people are worried about, and your representation of this critique is by smearing them as toxic fanboys.
When geek culture titans like Batman v Superman received negative reviews, fans defended them with hate mail and conspiracy theories about crooked critics.
Stop. A lot of people really didn't like Batman v Superman. The movie as a whole is a mixed bag. I, for one, hated it. Was there a conspiracy about crooked critics in Batman v Superman? I don't think so, but one thing I can say for sure is that the critics are incredibly biased, and not in a good way, towards DC films. If you're biased because the film is bad, that is fine, as long as you can properly explain it to the audiences. But if your explanation is a dull chore steeped in flaccid machismo, a shapeless, poorly edited trudge that adds some mildly appalling sexism, and even a soupcon of racism to its abundant, hideously timed gun worship, forgive me for saying that you're not doing a good job at this critique. Suicide Squad is bad because it's a really bad film with poorly developed characters and a messy, garbage story that I'm honestly shocked that it has some resolution at all. Why can't the critics just talk about the quality of the film rather than making insults or political diatribes? That's what happened with the positive reviews of Ghostbusters, and that's what happened with the negative reviews of Suicide Squad. And by the way, for those of you who send me articles about Far Cry 5's politically slanted reviews, we'll get to that in the next video. The writer then cited a tweet citing one really damn hot take on this entire debacle.
Any dork hating on Ready Player One stems from jealousy, since Ernest Cline seems to be living in the ultimate geek make-a-wish, but his follow-up novel proves he's not a one-wish phony. Geeks should rejoice in Ready Player One. This is their Black Panther.
I am a dork, but I don't hate Ready Player One because I'm jealous for the writer's success. I mean, who wants to be a writer whose books is selling like hotcakes and be adapted by Steven Spielberg into a major motion picture? Absolutely everybody, but not me, because Tarantino is my favorite senpai. Now let me be clear here that I didn't hate Ready Player One, and I didn't think it was too much of a bad film, but it is a mediocre film that appeals to the lowest common denominator. It consists of nothing but pop culture references on the top of a pretty mediocre story. I don't see how else I can ram this message to you, but there you go.
In fairness, it's annoying when a vocal crowd of people openly hate something you love, especially when they haven't even seen it.
Well, I have seen the film, and I can safely report to you that if you think that the film is nostalgic pandering to the dumbest possible level, you are absolutely correct. But even if I haven't seen the film, people are making opinions on the trailer, the premise, and the story of the book that the film was based on. It is true that it's annoying when people hate something that you love, especially when they haven't even seen it, but you know what is also annoying? Having these legitimate critiques on the premise and the trailer and the book of the film, and then be called a toxic fanboy when we decided to air it because it sounded pretty negative to you.
Opponents are going after its basic concept because it is such a perfect illustration of toxic fanboy culture and its obsession with masturbatory trivia. It simultaneously caters to the idea that white male nerds are underdog heroes while proving that they are actually a dominant force in Hollywood. That's why so many people are bringing up Jupiter Ascending as a point of comparison.
I have no idea what you're rambling about, writer. What do you mean as opponents? Are you talking about the nerds or critics like you? Most people that I talked to really didn't like the concept of this nostalgia pandering film, but your criticism towards the movie is that it has a white male nerd who is an underdog hero? Say what you want about Wade Watts, but he is an underdog hero in every sense of the word. He has no power, he lives in the slums. Oh, yeah, I forgot, he's white. Therefore, he has more privilege and will not be discriminated because of their skin color. Okay, fine. I'll accept your point, writer.
When Ready Player One targets audience in the cast of Big Bang Theory, Jupiter Ascending aimed itself at women who grew up on Disney princesses and fanfiction. As a more feminine version of The Matrix or Star Wars, it is a self-indulgent fantasy where the heroine becomes a space princess and falls in love with werewolf Channing Tatum. Critically derided and poorly marketed by the studio, it developed a cult following because its audience actually doesn't get much attention from Hollywood.
So, you're telling me that Jupiter Ascending has a cult following from fangirls who love to write Disney fanfictions that don't get noticed by Hollywood senpai? Girls, there are so many films that are just much better than Jupiter freaking Ascending. Why did you choose this film? Why? Just why? Why is this film the justification for your existence?
Like Stranger Things, Guardians of the Galaxy, and the Adam Sandler movie Pixels, its archetypal audience is a white guy member of the original Ghostbusters generation.
I have no idea what you are talking about, writer. I am dead serious. For the love of God, speak English.
This isn't contemporary nerd culture. It isn't contemporary anything. For a look at what shaped the counterculture nerd landscape today, you need to understand fanfic, Homestuck, and the rise of 4chan. Perhaps fortunately, this isn't something Hollywood has managed to monetize. Yet.
I know what a fanfic is, writer. I know what Homestuck is. I know what 4chan is. And none of those things are shaping the counterculture nerd landscape today, which you absolutely have to define, writer, because this article is gibberish to its fullest extent. Why the internet is so ready to hate Ready Player One? That is a question that I don't think I'll get an answer to because you are way too busy rambling about stuff. You asked a question that you didn't answer. In other words, garbage article. I love that a lot of the hyperlinks that you give are just mere tags to the search result directing to your website, which doesn't always work. The fanfiction page isn't a tag, it's a full article that debunks the fanfiction myths. This has no relation to the previous article at all, but I will save this article for the future. Still, what this and a lot of other articles tell me is that apparently the backlash that comes from this film can be explained by associating it with a particular event from the end of 2014. So here's Vox explaining it to you. I will get straight to the good bits.
The writing was never good. It's mostly just long lists of pop culture references and Wade's opinions as to whether the property in question sucks or rocks. But for the kind of book Ready Player One is trying to be, that doesn't necessarily matter.
This writer is exactly why people hated the premise and the trailer. Good writing doesn't matter, but mob pop culture references. Excellent. Please continue to poorly justify this tripe. The writer associates the ridiculously dumb premise of the book and the negative press that came from it with the rise of GamerGate. Good God, can you just let this movement die already? This movement is dead. It is irrelevant. I don't want to tell people what it is again and again and again because it is irrelevant.
GamerGate is about gatekeeping. So is Ready Player One.
Okay, writer. Please elaborate.
GamerGate's origins are nebulous and contradictory, as ably outlined by my colleague Todd Wanderwerf. What's important for Ready Player One's conversation is that what GamerGate has evolved in 2015, and that is angry gamers, mostly young straight white men, hurling abuse at their targets, mostly women, in the name of a kind of nerd purity.
Thank you, writer. I don't have to explain GamerGate to everyone because you have defined it as a movement consisting of angry gamers hurling abuse at women. Now, let's ask the question, writer. Is the backlash for Ready Player One caused by those awful GamerGaters? Is the backlash for this film caused by the gamers' desire for nerd purity, whatever that means? The basic point that I got from this article is that the movie got backlash, not from the gamers themselves who looked at this film and thought that this is pandering to the highest level, but it's thanks to gamers for putting a bad name to the mainstream media due to what happened in GamerGate. The movie got backlash from the media because GamerGate happened in 2014, and the media's views towards geeks have dwindled since then. Back then, geeks are cool. Now, they're just haters on the internet. They are misogynistic trolls wants to drive women out of gaming. That's what the writer wants you to believe, when in reality, most people looked at Ready Player One and thought, wow, there is so much unnecessary pandering in this tripe. Wow, that writing on the book was horrible. Gamers hated Ready Player One, the book and the premise for the movie. Not just you, writer, not just the press, but gamers as well. They hate the movie that consists of nothing but pandering. They hate that they're being treated like a bunch of dullards who are going to screech if they're being thrown pop culture references every second. One or two is fine, but in the end, you're making a story. In the end, you're making a film, not as one Twitter user points out, a display of your collection. Ooh, look, this character is from this game. This character is from this movie. This weapon is from this game. Some people pointed out that ever since the success of Stranger Things, we are basically asking for nostalgia. But just because nostalgia is trendy doesn't mean that you should do it for the sake of trend. Dark gritty reboots used to be a trend, doesn't mean that we don't get tripes like Bomberman X-Zero. And then you associated the death of a swatting incident with GamerGate. Not true. Read here.
The world of Klein's escapist fantasy is a world of elitist gatekeeping. It's a world in which a person's value is determined by their knowledge of esoteric cultural trivia, where those of lesser value must be defeated and wiped away, and where gaming is all that matters.
Well, there you go, writer. You finally get to the problem of why this movie and the premise sucked, and why people constantly and relentlessly bashed it. Finally, we get to some common grounds. Finally, this article doesn't go into full bonkers brigade.
And crucially, it is a world specifically for straight white men.
Do you have any books written by black people?